Today, we are going to rank every Twisted Metal boss from worst to best. Has this ever been done before? Probably not. Who would ever think of something such as this? Regardless, there's a lot of them, and we are going to see where they stand. I just want to say before we start, all of the Twisted Metal bosses aside from Sweet Tooth are going to be considered as one entry to make it fair, because there's just going to be too many bosses that have random placements and make zero sense. 2. These bosses are being judged by normal mode only. I made a video not too long ago about the worst boss in the franchise. When that was made, I was trying to piece together the worst possible boss fight. So if you're wondering why the bottom here is different, well, that's why. Let us get right into the worst boss in the series. Something from 2012? Like, who would have thought? The Carnival of Carnage. Honestly, the little GTA Online minigame section is kind of interesting. Taking these clowns and driving them into the shits, going into propellers and doing other stupid things is kind of fine. Doesn't really add much to the experience, so you could remove this all if you wanted to. My problem with this boss arises at the helicopter part. I'm not sure if this was supposed to be fun or not. I looked through the PlayStation Store to see if it was DLC. I couldn't find it there either. You just need to shoot these tooth mech warriors, grab them, and drop it into the head of this beast. Pause. Flying Talon is really awkward. Going back to 2012, attempting to deal with these controls is a very off-putting experience to say the least. The twin stick nonsense, trying to fly around with the mech. If you're struggling to control it, the mech falls to the ground and you need to pick it up again. It just doesn't feel like a Twisted Metal boss. There's not really much combat going on. Like, sure, you have to kill the mech, but you just keep picking things up and putting them down into this beast. Sure, there's only a handful that you need to drop. It's not really fun, and that's the problem. Carnival of Carnage isn't even really hard as a fight. It's quite easy, actually. The challenge comes from the controls, irritations of picking up the bots, and glitches. Calling this a no fun zone is a perfect description. If someone really wanted to change this out, I could kinda see it, I guess. It just depends on how you look at it. For me, it takes the bottom spot because it's not a challenge, it's not fun, it's not anything. It's just annoying. Our next placement is Tower Tooth from Twisted Metal Head On. I just never can with this boss. I'm already tired of it the second it begins. At first, you're like, alright, this isn't too bad, just keep shooting the building on wheels until phase 2 begins. The impasse is met when you figure out your car needs to be angled upward or positioned anywhere to hit Tower Tooth in the head. Sure, it sounds like a silly little battle, but every fight against Tower Tooth is exactly the same. You go in a spot where you have the broken ass mega guns and you just shoot him until he's dead, and that's it. You can't go anywhere near Tooth because you flop around like a fish out of water due to this electric attack that hits you no matter what you do. Even if you shield the car, it just flips around, being very annoying. Yes, just take the controller out of my hands, like what a challenge. You have no options of how you play the game. You need to sit far back, using the mega guns as I said, or whatever else is in your arsenal. Tower Tooth is also able to shield, so you have the classic moment of just waiting until it goes away. And my favorite part of this whole battle, you can deal all the damage you want to, go crazy with the mega guns, shoot all your missiles, and then you're like, maybe I should get a little bit of health for myself and a few weapons to finish him off. You go and do your shit, and then you see Tower Tooth again and he has full health. Like, what knucklehead, lame brain idiot decided to put health pickups in the path of the final boss? Sometimes he'll just keep picking them up over and over again, and the player needs to keep doing his health down over and over. Not to mention some character special weapons can't even damage Tower Tooth. Like, it's just a disaster. A no fun zone boss. I cannot stand fighting this thing, and genuinely one of the most irritating bosses in the series, and one of the worst for me. Iron Maiden is next, 2 entries from 2012 in the bottom 3, sounds about right. Iron Maiden is in the same boat as Carnival of Carnage, just not as bad, obviously. You have a multitude of phases you need to deal with. Of course, their attempt at trying to make bosses feel more large-scaled. It doesn't really fit the franchise to me. Like, we're still playing through levels in a tournament with no change in the formula whatsoever. The main frustration comes from the quote nuke missile to me. Of course, some of the other sections can be annoying, like the cage or the aggression of the little cars trying to push you off the map, sometimes happening right when you spawn, being really frustrating. Hitting this bitch with the nuke missile can be really difficult depending on how the Iron Maiden wants to behave, juking and dodging it constantly, so you need to keep destroying the red hearse, bringing it back to this weird ass machine, launch the thing over and over again, attempting to hit her. The controls on that missile are very sensitive and can be really difficult to control unless you're really acquainted with how it goes. I was never a fan of these unnecessarily expansive bosses being added. I appreciate them for trying, but I don't have much else to say about the shit heap. Very redundant, boring, annoying, very similar to Carnival of Carnage, but a bit better since we have the ability to do some combat, and the fighting is slightly enjoyable in some cases, still unnecessary. Boarhawk, Snorhawk, Warhawk, a good old friend of mine. I can never stand battling this bitch, especially when you're doing runs of black and you need to fight Snorhawk 3, 4, 5 times. Like, get real. It's a common case of over redundancy. This fight is very boring to do, being something similar to what you'd make a child do: take the little tanker man, bring him to the middle, and keep repeating until the shield breaks and then you kill the helicopter guy. It can become frustrating when the tankers don't want to cooperate. Sometimes they don't feel like going in the middle. Thankfully, you can push them, but unfortunately, Boarhawk will destroy them and you need to keep waiting for them to come back. Shockingly, this fight has more downtime than you'd imagine, not really making much sense, especially with how fast Black plays all throughout the tournament run. Also, the other, much better boss earlier on. We run into a similar issue with the previous bosses where some character special weapons just don't affect Warhawk. I'm not sure why this choice was made. Thankfully, Warhawk, in theory, you can do some weird stuff to let everyone's special do damage, like Darkseid's Ram, but it's not really apparent to the player, which is the problem. People shouldn't need to be Indiana Jones just to do some damage with their special weapons on a boss that we're forced to fight. I feel like Snorhawk is better than the bosses we've mentioned so far, which again isn't really saying much. It's the top of the big stink list. Being bosses where certain characters can't even hurt them with special weapons, outright boring filthy trash that no one wants to do more than once. We are starting the beginning of our real list, Piecemeal, the big boss, who I had as the worst boss in the series on that previous video I mentioned at the beginning of this one. On hard mode, that absolutely is the case. This character belongs right at the bottom of the list for being irritating and straight boring. Thankfully, on normal mode, Piecemeal is bearable, still boring though. The main issue with this boss is the level actually. Now Slang is a very poorly designed level, which is shocking and rare for Small Brawl since it has the best overall selection in the franchise to me. We barely have any weapons to pick up here. Obviously you need those for the boss, like how are you going to kill them without those? You can't. This battle is very RNG dependent on top of that. If you get unlucky, let's say you gotta fight Mr. Slam, Darkseid, Hammerhead, and Shadow, 4 heavily armored enemies, you need to expend all of your weapons on those characters rather than the boss. You kill one of them, then Piecemeal appears, you do a quarter of his health, he disappears, and you rinse and repeat that process until he is dead. The armor is slightly obnoxious even on normal mode, and the problem arises because Piecemeal can land right on top of a health pickup, so you need to be careful after breaking that stage with the popcorn cart. I never understand why anyone would make a boss spawn on top of health. We have about 5 to 6 weapon pickups throughout the level, so you'll be spending a lot of your time waiting for specials to regenerate or weapons to respawn. More downtime than probably any other boss in the series, and this is exacerbated on hard mode, but we're not talking about that garbage, thank God. If you do get lucky RNG, well, this fight is actually pretty easy, depending on your character, so it's more of a 50-50 situation. It's much better than the rest of the bosses we've mentioned so far. Again, on normal mode we are talking here. Trapper comes in next, the first of the Small Brawl bosses, suffering from the same issues as Piecemeal without the whole RNG based aspect where your chance of victory can be a pubic hair of a chance. At least with Trapper, it's a completely raw battle and power of wits. Unless you shoot him, he shields and kills you with a volley of power missiles, which happens quite often since Trapper loves to spam those. I don't really understand the balance of this boss. One, his pathing is glitched, so occasionally he'll just get stuck and not move while you just wait for power missiles to spawn in. 2, we are very limited to what we have at our expense, relying entirely on the aforementioned power missiles or your character's special, forcing the player to keep waiting and waiting and waiting for a power missile to respawn. You shoot 2 at them, maybe a special, you drive away and continue with the waiting process. It's very dull and boring. The special weapon Trapper shoots out is a bunch of monkeys, which can almost instantly kill you if you're in a closed corridor, so you're going near him is almost a death sentence even on normal mode. Again, this is even worse on hard mode. I don't really have much else to say about this boss. I do like the design of the level we fight Trapper in, it fits really well. It's just missing the fun aspect a game is supposed to have. Twisted Metal 4 bosses come in at the next spot since we're over the irritation and reach the section of boring ass snooze fests that make your playthrough come to a halt. I have nothing against the designs of these bosses, some of them are quite good. Axel looks nice, Minion has some little shits on him, but overall, each of them are just not fun to battle or don't really feel like anything, to be honest. Like, it's just a battle, seemingly just like another regular enemy more than anything. Sure, we get a 2-on-1 battle against the Brothers of Construction and Super Augur and Slam. What makes these bosses actually memorable to anyone aside from that? I don't know. The situation becomes worse since we're fighting these nameless enemies with no drivers or personalities aside from knowing them from previous games. To my knowledge, these were implemented during the end of development, so it's understandable why we have no drivers. Regardless, the game is hurt by fighting these people. Even if we had drivers, would it fix the fact we fight one every level? No. This is just a poor way to implement a boss into a video game. There's not much else to say aside from that. Would I rather fight these guys over the ones we've mentioned so far? Honestly, yes, because they aren't annoying, making me wait around, being an overly boring loop of gameplay. We just shoot this garbage until they die. It's not fun, but it's not annoying either. Doesn't really feel like anything. How nice is that? Cousin Edward, the filthy rat who is not a contestant in this tournament. Cousin Eddie sucks, there's no beating around the bush, but when I was piecing this list together, I really thought about it. All the bosses I placed before Cousin Eddie, would I really fight any of them before his bitch ass? Honestly, no. The reason is because Cousin Edward is a pathetic joke. He doesn't even feel like a boss. Any character can just trample him with ease. We get this hype up section with ATVs, fighting him and killing this whole group in about 20 seconds. Edison breaks out from his chains, and during his quote battle, he's just a diet minion with weak damage. You can literally freeze the guy and destroy all his panels in a second. The only thing that's sort of annoying is the top one, but you could just use a napalm and destroy it in one hit. It may depend on someone's definition of a boss being bad. Some would see this as a piece of junk, as one of the worst bosses you can possibly have. You can just sneeze on him and he dies. The way I look at this, I was like, okay, is he worse than the Twisted Metal 4 bosses? You know, because I feel like the rest of the ones we've had before him, you know, they're boring as hell. I don't want to battle them at all. So with Cousin Eddie, I'm like, is Twisted Metal 4 bosses worse than him? Honestly, not really. Like, they're still boring as shit. Like, both of them are probably interchangeable. At least Cousin Eddie actually has a personality. There's someone behind the wheel. With Twisted Metal 4, there's just nothing. It's a personality-less waste of skin, essentially. With Eddie, there's someone there. He's a loser. He's dumb as shit, but, like, we have something to grip onto. It's like, oh, I know this guy. You know, that's really about it. There's nothing else to say. He sucks. There's nothing good about this boss at all. I hate him. I don't like him. They should have just implemented him in a different way, like having him come into the tournament and have some chaos creation, but apparently that was too much, way too hard to create an idea like that. So we're just stuck with the piece of shit we have now, so we gotta deal with it. Darktooth from Twisted Metal Head On. I don't really have any words. Just look at this and it explains the entire situation. Okay. Okay, he kind of just like looked at me and just he's driving at the wall. Dude, what is he doing? Okay. The ultimate Darktooth battle is what this is. Holy shit. The sub-boss of the game is fucking banging his head against the wall. Sweet Tooth from Twisted Metal 4 comes next, and why the hell did I put this annoying bitch-made character above the rest? Being the most overpowered boss in the franchise, having a special that kills you practically instantly, going through walls to the point a lot of players are forced to exploit him by sticking these 3 shits on top of a house, trick him to follow you, and he dies. Well, it's very simple for me. Sure, he's a very disgraceful battle, but it makes sense to why we are fighting him. Sort of. Not the fact of when we kill the man himself, we see Sweet Tooth juggling up a storm behind Melvin. Like, is it a doppelganger? Is it the little clowns driving it? No one knows. But the fight itself fits with the tournament, which is something rare in this franchise. The final boss is supposed to be the big guy of the run. Most of the time, it's just some random guy or someone who doesn't really have relation onto what's going on. Sure, Darktooth from Twisted Metal 2 is a good boss, but it's just Sweet Tooth's dad. Does it really have relation to the tournament? If you want to make the most ridiculous stretches possible from the previous game with Charles Cheese wishing to drive for Calypso, then you fall down this rabbit hole of like Outlaw was the one who was victorious in the tournament and not Yellow J, so is this the same dad? Being a can of worms I don't even want to tread into. This fight also did a good job of being memorable. Even if someone hates Twisted Metal 4, they most likely remember fighting Mr. Tooth. If this was anyone else, he'd be much lower, but the fact it fits with the game, the level is pretty good as well and goes along with the character. We're also able to exploit him if we want to, making the fight a lot easier. It's just a middling fight, I'd say. It's not terrible or good. We have the option of dealing with the nonsense or just making it non-existent. Darkside from Twisted Metal 3 is where the real list begins. We are over the garbage, annoying, stinky, gross battles that are random, irritating, pointless, feeling more like a waste of time rather than anything else. I prefer the more simple bosses in Twisted Metal, as I said with one of the 2012 entries, since the tournaments are simple by nature and people are expected to keep replaying it, having a boss that's overly redundant and annoying just doesn't work. Thankfully, we're in the Freedom Zone now. Is Darkside a good boss? Not really, but it fits with the vibe of Twisted Metal to me. Darkside is an iconic character at this point in that semi-truck. My only real problem with this boss is the fact it's just kind of random. I don't even understand why Darkseid is a boss on the second level of all things, feeling out of place slightly. The Freeze Flame special is also very annoying because he'll spam it to his heart's content and kill you instantly sometimes. This can even happen on easy mode, seemingly the only attack Darkseid will ever use during a battle. Thankfully, if you stay on his side, you can kill him quite easily. Minion from Twisted Metal 3, he's a good kid, the blue collar character. I feel like this minion is well balanced, he comes in to do his job and clocks out. I've never found this version of him to be that difficult, probably the easiest version of him aside from the 4's iteration. The iconic special of 3 missiles followed by a freeze returned here. This can be spammed. Unlike Darkseid, Minion will actually use other attacks. Unless you're on the hardest difficulty, good luck trying to get close to him without being frozen. The player can do a similar strategy as Darkseid is sitting on the sides, knocking him over on repeat, not letting him do anything. Easy exploit with a solid challenge. Minion has always pulled this off quite well, and it's one of the best things about this character. You don't need to have all these systems in place like destroying a shield with tankers to make our boss harder. There's a perfect example right here of a boss that can whoop your ass in seconds without needing stupid gimmicks. The only complaint about this boss is where we fight him, London of all places. Like, it was a downgrade compared to the previous game that emulated a hell-like landscape fitting the character of Minion, who is a demon. Unless you really want to call London hell, I have no idea because I've never been there. Maybe it truly is a hellish landscape. Brothers Grimm from 2012 comes in next. Yes, something from 2012 actually ranked highly. It shocks me as well. But Brothers Grimm is honestly a good boss fight. There's nothing really annoying to deal with. It's just straight up action with some interesting stuff going on. Lots of destruction, no gimmicks really, just pure raw dog Twisted Metal action. If every boss from 2012 was similar to this, we'd have no problems at all. What is provided to the player here is what we expected from a new generation. Large monster trucks going crazy with a bunch of obnoxious sound effects, explosions, and death. The team really seemed to put effort in here, and it shows. The instant I got into this battle, I noticed it was great. It really saddens me to see what potential we could have had with other bosses if they were actually done in this vein. My only problem is that we're forced to play as Roadkill. Other than that, he is a fun boss who's actually worth going back to from time to time just to enjoy the experience. Darktooth is coming in next, the original building on wheels, one of the most iconic bosses in this series. The intimidation factor alone makes Darktooth memorable. It's the first boss being this large. When you see this guy driving down the road behind you in the rearview mirror or just trying to play chicken with him, it's pretty scary. Darktooth can just touch you, doing loads of damage, crushing you underneath the wheel, which is twice the size of any character you're playing as. We have a common theme here with the better bosses in the series. There are no dumb gimmicks for the most part, just a straight up battle, which always works for this franchise. Darktooth can be quite tough if you don't know how to take care of him. The only problem he has is some specials don't work on him like the lesser bosses in the series. I mean, it would be funny to see Slam pick up Darktooth and slam his ass into the ground, but sadly we cannot do that, which also knocks some points off of the boss overall. My strategy taking care of this guy when I was struggling was just drive in a straight line, dropping some mines down. He'll keep running them over like an idiot until he's dead. It's cheap shit, but Darktooth can actually be really tough depending on how he wants to behave, so keeping a pussy play tactic like that into your pocket is very important. You also need to fight the head of his truck afterwards. I'm not really a fan of this little gag nonsense. Sure, it may work the first time battling the boss. This really should have been a one-time ordeal. Similar to Warhawk, it gets really annoying to keep fighting the head every time. Granted, it's nowhere near as annoying as Snorhawk is, since Darktooth's head is quite easy and anyone should be able to kill it without dying. Darktooth overall is a great boss, very intimidating, and a tough cookie, being very, very memorable. Minion from Twisted Metal Black comes in next. Why does a gimmick character place highly? Well, it's very simple. It was executed properly. Who would have thought that's the case? Having 4 panels on each side of the gas truck. You need to shoot them until they're broken, and then you shoot the big tanker man until he is dead. Every special works well. Minion is a tough cookie, just like Darktooth. More a stale one because he will burn your ass to a crisp if you get close. The damage is quite insane. Some people do have a problem with this boss, and I would say it does take some time to warm up to this encounter. It is a solid experience. His back panel is annoying to hit, but thankfully we can go invisible, shoot the thing, and get rid of it really easily for the most part. I have had moments where I game over on this fight because I can just never hit the back panel and he always turns away from me regardless of what I do. Minion has his own house, the music score is good on this level, and originally I wasn't really a fan of him. But looking at every boss we've gone through, like so many of them suck, boring experiences, overly redundant gimmick crap like tankers, the Tower Tooth situation, playing GTA Online minigames, pointless bosses, and the list goes on and on. Looking at all of it, you really notice when a gimmick is executed properly. Minion from Black pulls that off while having a solid challenge on top of it. Only if Minion was the final boss, it probably would have helped Black as an overall game. The top 3 begins with the big cheese, the Monster Madness himself, Twisted Metal 2 Minion. I would say the most iconic character right next to Sweet Tooth in this series. He's been in so many different games, showing his face as the midpoint boss here. Like, yeah, he didn't actually come from Twisted Metal 2, he came from the first game, but he was popularized in this game. It's an amazing experience of a boss. Minion is not an unfair, cheap, annoying, filthy piece of trash like a lot of other bosses beforehand. I've always seen this fight as a very, very well designed one. You have a really large arena to use at your advantage. The scenery fits to who the character is, Minion being a demon. He's also very fast, has high ramming damage, loud special weapon, being everything you want a boss to be. This is what every boss should strive to be in the series in my opinion. Not being over the top, nothing crazy, just a solid battle. It was set up so well, and you cannot praise this enough to how well the team made Minion in Twisted Metal 2. There's nothing else to say aside from that, it's just a fantastic boss. This is not a joke, I have Primeval from Twisted Metal 3 as number 2. Why? Well, I feel like this boss is a very underrated one. He checks all the boxes when it comes to a boss. By far being the largest automobile in the entire game, so Primeval is intimidating. Very good car design, loud engine sound with a powerful special weapon. But what makes this boss so special to be at number 2? Well, if we go back to what I said about Sweet Tooth from Twisted Metal 4's entry, this boss fight makes sense. If you don't know, Primeval is essentially Calypso's main demon or right-hand man, which is something that's never touched on again. Calypso is a powerful guy, obviously he runs the tournament, so why are we never fighting his people? Surely there are some supporters out there. We battle in Calypso's blimp while fighting his biggest, toughest soldier who is also a well-designed, intimidating boss. I think people underestimate how important the setup for a boss is. That's who I reserve the top 3 positions for. Most of the bosses in this series are just random people or a big monster man without anything making much sense to why they even exist. When there's a reason we're fighting someone, when there's a reason they are the final boss of a tournament, it makes the fight more memorable and impactful for the player. I like Darktooth, he's a big man. Does Hong Kong really fit him being the final boss? Not really. The fact he's Sweet Tooth's dad, does that make sense? No, unless you make absurd stretches that can be disproved quite easily or counter-argued with much of the same. Looking at Twisted Metal 2 alone, forget the previous game exists, does it make sense that Sweet Tooth's dad is the final boss of the tournament? No, it doesn't. Primeval does a good job of fitting the position he is in. As Calypso's right-hand man, he's basically protecting him. When we kill Primeval, the player receives the prize, which is just an overlooked thing, and I really enjoyed this boss for that reason alone. It's a shame we never got more of him, someone I've always wanted to see return and have a real shot in the spotlight. The number 1 is Minion from the first Twisted Metal. Is there really anything better than battling a champion? No, there is not. Being the previous winner, it immediately makes our fight more interesting. His difficulty is underestimated by a lot of people. Exploiting Minion is honestly a good idea because of how gross this fight is. The amount of damage you receive in seconds is disgusting. We have our ramp area where he glitches, which makes me very happy because we can easily beat him. Having access to almost every special on the roster, you need to be careful. The rooftops is a perfect level to battle him on also. The soundtrack fits perfectly, having that Microsoft Paint sunset in the background, being the only unique level in the first Twisted Metal game, adding that new falling off the map stuff. Sure, it's not crazy looking back, but for the game, it did a really good job building up a boss that's memorable, really tough, great level, amazing soundtrack, fighting the previous champion, making it the best boss in the series to me. And that is my ranking of worst to best bosses. Some may be controversial, but that's the fun of making a list. The more enjoyable bosses to me are the ones that are more simple, with little amounts of gimmicks and just straightforward fun. You can make a challenge without adding all this crap. And I'm curious to hear what everyone else's lists are, if you can even fit them in a comment. I don't even know at this point. If it's possible, make sure to do it.
Hello! Hey, me! Thank you to every one of you who support the channel and help this become a possibility. We all in the Purple Monkey family love you. All hail Hanji Buddy!